And I have the opportunity today to interview Sujith Kollamthodi. He is with Ricardo AEA, and he is in Detroit right now. Just flew in from the UK to give a talk at the SAE Congress. And it's the subject of that talk that I really find fascinating because he's going to be talking about the future of transportation in our urban future, in our cities of the future, and obviously because EV World is interested in what role electric transportation might play in that, we want to see what his perspective is on this. So, Sujith, welcome to EV World.
Hi, Bill. Good to speak with you.
Good. I hope you had a good trip in from the UK.
Yeah, very good trip. Very smooth.
Excellent. That's great. Look, well, you're going to be talking tomorrow at the SAE Congress, as I understand. I guess there's another gentleman also from Ricardo that I think is going to be giving a talk as well. But yours interested me because of the sort of the sense that I'm starting to hear from individuals like yourself who are thinking about what will transportation look like in the next 25 to 50 years. Given how the population of the planet's growing, how we're getting more urbanized, what role do, electric vehicles, if that's even what the future is going to be, what role does transportation play in meeting the needs of the cities of the future? So let's first of all start off about telling us a little bit about Ricardo AEA. I'm familiar with the engineering side of the company, so give me a little bit of background on who the AEA is.
Okay. So Ricardo AEA is an environmental consultancy. We were previously AEA Technology, a leading UK environmental consultancy that was bought by Ricardo at the end of 2012. We do a lot of work for policymakers all over the world, looking at the world's greatest environmental and energy challenges and how you can solve those sorts of big, major pressing problems that are facing the world today. Okay,
so it's not strictly just focused on automobiles, because when I think of Ricardo, I think of their role in engineering and helping car makers come up with solutions to, their particular challenges.
Absolutely right. We look at all environmental problems in all sectors. So we have a very big air quality practice, a very big energy and climate change practice. I lead our sustainable transportation practice. We also do work on waste and resource efficiency as well.
Okay. Now you're in Detroit for the Congress. Give us a little bit of background for people who've not been to the Congress. I had the opportunity to go once, and it's an amazing event with lots of booths and exhibitors and sessions and things. So tell us a little bit about the Congress itself.
Yeah, well, it's a huge event, Bill. I mean, absolutely huge. Certainly one of the biggest conferences I've been to. You've got all the big OEMs there presenting. You've got technology experts and really some very interesting talks as well. I've just been to one just now on the future of connected and autonomous vehicles, which is particularly interesting for me.
Yes, yep.
You've also got ride and drive events if you want to try out an electric vehicle. There's a nice small test track inside Cobo Hall that you can try out the latest vehicles. So yeah, it's an interesting place.
I think I know where that is. It's down in the basement, right?
Actually, this year, no.
Oh, no? Is it upstairs?
No. The ride and drive is right next to the main technology booths.
Oh, okay.
It's on the ground level as you enter.
They're electric vehicles, so they're not spitting any pollution out inside the building.
Yeah.
Very
exactly.
cool. All right, so your talk then is going to be about what your thoughts are in respect to transportation in the cities of the future. So give me a little bit of groundwork. What sort of inspired you to give that particular talk?
Well, we're doing quite a lot of work in this area at the moment. And that's part of my talk as well. We're helping, in Europe, we're helping out cities in terms of developing their transport roadmaps out to 2030 and beyond. Because there are some very, very important objectives that have been set at the European level for cities, particularly in terms of cutting CO2 emissions, but also, one of the main objectives is halving the use of conventionally fueled vehicles. Now, that's a huge challenge for cities in Europe. Many of them don't have the resources or the skills to be able to achieve this, and that's something that we're starting to help cities with today.
Okay. So in this, obviously, you've probably spent a lot of time thinking about it. What are the sort of resources that you bring to underpinning a talk like this?
Okay, well, one of the big talking points I wanted to bring into my discussion is really around urbanization and what that means for our planet over the next 20, 30, 40 years. In 2008, for the first time ever, more people in the world lived in cities than outside of cities.
Yeah.
That's only going to, increase. By 2040, it's predicted that 2/3 of the world's population will be living in cities, and that's going to put huge pressure on our transportation systems. Absolutely huge demands on transport. And what does that mean in terms of, gridlock in particular,
Right.
but also environmental challenges related to that, in terms of air pollution and climate change impacts as well.
Yeah.
So those are some of the big themes that I bring into my talk.
Okay.
And then also discuss how we can resolve some of those issues.
Right. Now, in a lot of the developing world, much of this takes place this growth takes place in the way of sprawl, where you have shanty towns and favelas that sort of spring up in places where you would normally not build a building or put any kind of infrastructure in there. Or is this growth going to be more vertical, if you will, where as we grow, we see more people being packed into smaller areas, or does it just simply get a mega city just sprawl bigger and bigger and bigger?
I think we'll see both of those, and I think it will depend on the local conditions and indeed local regulations. It's very, very geographically dependent, so we can't say that it's one or the other. I think we'll see both happen over the next 10, 20 years, yeah.
Okay, and of course both of these sort of dictate how you end up planning for a community. I know we have an issue here. In fact, this was just reported last night on a local news station that our local transit service is sort of revamping their service model. And there is a young lady that has a disability who happens to live now half a mile outside of the area that is being served by the mobile vans that tie into the bus service. And so that's presenting a problem to her mother, because the mother, who's a working mom, wants her daughter to be able to take part in some of these summer activities. Well, she has to be at work, so how does the young girl get to these events? That's what's happening here in a relatively prosperous town. And I can't imagine what happens as these cities get bigger. The more they sprawl out, and the poorer the population becomes per capita wise, the harder it is to do things like public transit.
Yeah, that's certainly a big problem, and I think it's mixed depending on the type of city you're talking about. I mean, even in cities in developed countries, you've got issues with public transit in terms of the costs associated with infrastructure that might be required for that transit, and indeed, operators willing to provide those sorts of services if it's not financially viable. So there are all sorts of issues that need to be taken into account. Another aspect that I also touch on in the talk is, whether there's a need for more shared vehicle services, and indeed also non-motorized transport such as cycle schemes, public bike sharing schemes, and of course things like e-bikes as well, and what role they can play in the future cities.
Right. Well, one of the things that that I've noticed, particularly in Latin America and in the Philippines, you have a lot of private shuttle bus services. They're not full sort of 40-foot transit buses like we think of in most American cities. These are small 20, 30 passenger vehicles that operate sometimes the same 2 or 3 companies competing for the same passengers at the same bus stop. Does that then become kind of a model where we see this growth of privatization of transportation? Or do we see the cities just simply saying, no, we have to do a better job with our public transit, be it BRT systems or subway systems, or just traditional maybe electric buses and trams?
Again, it's going to be very diverse, I think. There's I can't say that it's one or the other. I think we're seeing what we're seeing in mobility generally is a breakdown of some of the traditional business models. and what that means in terms of who is providing mobility services in the future. People like private cars, but do they want the full cost of those private cars in the future? Can we see a future where actually you've got more shared car services or indeed shared bike services? Those sorts of things I think could be quite important, as well as public transit services. So all of those things.
So what's the future of, for example, the automobile as you see it, the private automobile in the future? You're talking to the board of directors of Ford Motor Company or Daimler or whoever, and they're saying, what's your best guess on what we're looking at 20, 30 years down the road with respect to our production capacity, not just the types of vehicles we build, because I think those will probably be increasingly electric, but do we focus on autonomous shuttle vans, where instead of having the driver, the thing just pulls up and it's robotically controlled. I don't know. I mean, I think we're still wrestling with what that's going to look like.
Yeah, I think many of the OEMs are starting to look down those sorts of avenues already, and realizing that might be part of their future. What I think will be interesting is how they work out how they continue to make money out of these new sorts of business models, because they may well be selling fewer vehicles in the future,
right?
But there may be additional services that can be packaged into the vehicle. And it's whether they're actually selling a vehicle. They may not be selling a vehicle. It might actually be the sale of a subscription to a service,
right?
A mobility service. That sort of thing might be the future for the OEMs.
So look into your crystal ball and sort of tell us what by 2030, when we've got 60% of the world population living in cities of populations of 20 million and more, what will that, ideally, if you could just say this is, magically build the perfect transportation system, what do you think that might look like?
Okay, well, I mean, I guess one of the big things I make a play of in my presentation is that any sort of future crystal ball gazing, it's there's some inherent weaknesses, and I bring out some past examples of future visions for the year 2000 from 1900 and how you can get it really wrong.
Right.
So I'm always wary of that. But what I would say is that I think the amount of pressure that we're seeing on the world's resources, material resources in particular, will also come to bear on the transportation system. So if you think about cars, I mean, they're highly underutilized machines.
Yeah.
Where they sit static for more than 95% of the time. So we've got to start thinking probably about a future where those resources are shared. We probably need fewer cars in the future and more people sharing those cars, and that's something that I think could happen. But you've got to win the consumer round. Is the consumer willing to go down that route? And maybe today's mature consumers, maybe that's anathema to them.
Right.
But the younger generation, I think, will see it differently, and are already seeing it differently.
Right.
There's much experience of the younger generation now, much less interested in buying cars, much more interested in being connected to their mobile phone and being able to use that, their smartphone while traveling. That's much more interesting for them. So if that continues in the future, then it's a different type of mobility that we'll be seeing, where people don't feel they have to be driving the vehicle themselves or even owning the vehicle themselves.
Yeah, well, this sounds a lot like what Adam Jonas at Morgan Stanley's been talking about. I don't know if you've seen his article where basically he makes the point that automobiles are this underutilized asset, and because of that, this whole industry is ripe for disruption. And,
right.
And of course, what he's talking about, I think, in fact, I've got an interview lined up with him, the author of the study, later this week. And,
right.
and so that's why I'm curious as to, he's saying that the big disruptor will not be the Tesla of the world in the automotive industry. It'll be the neighborhood electric car, the neighborhood electric vehicle, the GEMS cars, if you will, of the world.
Yeah, well, that lines up with, just a talk I just watched at SAE, which was on the, connected and autonomous vehicles. There were GM and Toyota talking at this, in this session saying exactly the same thing. You know, looking at these sort of neighborhood style vehicles, that could be one of the futures. So I think you know, it's becoming, you know, a possible trend.
Right.
We're seeing Google obviously has shown their vehicle, which is of that nature. These are low speed vehicles, maybe limited to 25 miles per hour. If you limit them to 25 miles per hour, then a lot of the regulations that go with a traditional vehicle in terms of safety don't necessarily apply.
Right.
You might actually have quite a cheap vehicle in terms of, you know, engineering that vehicle, and it could be quite a different sort of vehicle.
I'm curious, in the presentation Toyota did they talk about the iRoad? You know, they have this shared vehicle program going in Grenoble in France, and now they said they're going to be introducing a similar program in Tokyo. Did they make mention of that in their presentation?
Toyota didn't mention that, but actually during the talk there was discussion about another projects that are going on in Europe. Actually, a project called City Mobile, which is running in several European cities at the moment, including La Rochelle in France, a city in Finland, and Lausanne in Switzerland. And this is all. It's a shared EV, shared EV vehicle, autonomous vehicle.
Right.
And the whole idea behind the project is to get people used to the idea of these sorts of vehicles in shared environments, and also look at some of the regulatory issues around them. You know, how does insurance work, for example, in such a, when you've got autonomous vehicles? All of those sorts of things are going to be quite important as well. Right.
Now, these aren't autonomous vehicles in these programs yet, I assume.
Some of them are.
Oh, some of them are already.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
So in the UK where you're from, there just was a press release this week by eClub, or eCar Club, that they are introducing, I think it was something like 8 Renault Zoe electric sedans, and then 2 of the Renault Kangoo, panel vans at St. Andrews. So I'm wondering, are you sort of tracking what these programs like these car clubs are doing? And they're not in the same sense shared vehicles like, for example, the Autoliv in Paris, but they are in the sense that you have multiple families or individuals making use of a limited number of vehicles.
Yeah, these are becoming quite popular in certain UK cities for sure. There are quite a few car clubs operating in cities like London very successfully, and electric vehicle versions of those I can see as being, again, the sort of next step. So yeah, this doesn't surprise me. And again, I think we'll see more of that, over the next few years, particularly in our larger, metropolitan cities, where actually, parking is at a premium. Not everyone needs a car. In London, actually, car ownership is per capita is actually one of the lowest in the UK, because the public transport system is great. You don't need it really, but there are occasions when you might need a car for a certain type of journey, when you've got luggage or heavy groceries that you need to take, where public transport isn't going to be suitable. Right. So yeah, we can certainly see more of that happening.
So in your brainstorming of as a part of Ricardo, does the automotive side come in and work with you on this? And if they do, then sort of what are they thinking these vehicles of the future are going to look like?
Yeah, I mean, again, very much so. Yeah, we work very closely with our colleagues in Ricardo on these topics and other topics as well. And I think they're seeing the same sorts of things. A lot of the big OEMs now have urban mobility groups, which are looking at different business models. I think all of them are keeping an eye on what's happening with Google, and indeed what's happening with Apple, whether they're going to enter into this market in the future. I think the business models that we might see in the future are going to become, they're going to be different, I think. And I think each OEM is trying to work out how they can monetize those new business models, and whether it's really financially viable. I think that's the next important step. Because it's probably moving away from a world where everyone buys a car, and actually it's what is that new business model, and how is that going to work in the future? Right.
So we have the European market, obviously, the North American market, the huge market in China. What's sort of your your read of what's happening there. I mean, the government is attempting to encourage the uptake of electric vehicles, but again, I've long argued that what they ought to be doing is doing car share there. But you know, well, have you done much work with respect to what's going on in China?
In China, we haven't done a lot of work directly in China. I think one of the big pressures being faced in China, and well, not just China, but it's very visible in China, is the air pollution problem they're facing.
Yeah, huge.
It's absolutely massive. And you know, actually, when you look worldwide, and this is a thing I point out in my presentation, you know, 7 million people per year die from illnesses related to air pollution. Now, you wouldn't think that. You know, that's a huge number. That's bigger than the number of people that die each year from HIV and malaria combined. And it doesn't have, I mean, it's becoming more high profile, but you wouldn't think it was, you know, those sorts of numbers. Beijing obviously has been very high profile in terms of its air pollution problems. And the government in China is starting to take some steps. But we're seeing the same sort of problems in the United States and crucially in Europe too. You know, with in the last 15 years, diesel penetration has increased, you know, very dramatically in many European countries, with unforeseen consequences in terms of nitrogen dioxide concentrations. A really major problem at the moment, with many European countries under threat of multi-million-dollar fines from the European Commission.
And by way, I read recently that the worst polluted city is Delhi. Even worse than Beijing, which is hard to imagine.
And that's after Delhi has taken some very dramatic steps. About 15 years ago, all of the public transport vehicles and taxis and the auto rickshaws were converted to natural gas. It was a government mandate to do that, and yet still there is still a major air pollution problem. So yeah, this is something that's rising rapidly up the agenda, how we deal with the major air pollution problems that are caused by road transport.
So
yeah, the electric vehicle has a role to play there, but also shared vehicle services.
Okay, electric bicycles and scooters, what's your prognostication on those?
I think they have a bright future if we can convince consumers to get on a bike. And that, I think, is the main problem. If we, you know, there are pockets around the world where cycling has really taken off, and it shows how it can be done. You look at the Netherlands, you look at Denmark. You know, Denmark, 24%, 25% of all journeys are by bike. That's fantastic, absolutely fantastic. But there have been very significant support campaigns behind that. Both, you know, sort of government support campaigns, and indeed in the Netherlands, it's quite interesting how that evolved. You go back to the late 60s and 70s, and there were huge numbers of, the car traffic was increasing very dramatically in the Netherlands, and there were very large numbers of children killed in car accidents. And there was a very high-profile public campaign to, against these deaths from traffic-related accidents that actually changed people's views on cycling. And the government then brought in regulations and brought in steps that would help support cycling to the point now where cyclists have priority on the road. And it's those sorts of things that we need to think about in other cities as well, to get people comfortable with getting on a bike, to feel that it's safe.
Well, Boris Johnson, of course, has been doing that in London, I think, is, trying to encourage more of that, building a very expensive trail system through the heart of London, along the Thames, things like that.
Cycle superhighway, yeah, that's right. Yeah. So it's happening in cities, but I think there's more to be done. In London, still today, if you look in London, the number of journeys by bike, it's increased dramatically, but it's nowhere near the sorts of levels in Copenhagen, and it's still dominated by the lycra-clad, cycle warrior. In London. That's what it's like in London, and a lot of people still feel unsafe cycling in London, I think.
So, well, one of the things I guess helps in Mayor Johnson's case is he does from time to time, at least I've seen photos of him out riding his bike, hair blown everywhere. And
He's a very high pro. I mean, he is a cycle activist in that respect. He's very pro cycling and genuinely gets on his bike. So that does help. But
so how do we clone him? Or do we want to clone him?
I think we need to think about how the space is used on the road. If you look in the UK has a cycle network of sorts, but I mean, I'm a cyclist. I'm very pro cycling, but what I find when I'm cycling, I mean, my home city's Oxford. And you know, there's a lot of cycling that goes on.
A lot of bikes there, yeah.
But the cycle lanes are incredibly poor.
Yeah.
You know, they start and stop very erratically. You're suddenly dropped into the traffic with no warning. It's really quite shocking in places how poor the infrastructure can be. And I think that's important in terms of getting people comfortable with the idea of cycling and feeling safe on the road.
Yeah. Okay. Great. So you're going to talk tomorrow. What do you do after that? Then you head back home, or?
Actually, no. I'm heading over to California. I've got a few meetings in California, and I've got friends out there as well. So I'll be visiting them.
All right. Great. Well, look. Thank you so much, Sujith, for taking the time and talking to us about your presentation and about what the future may hold. Understanding there are no crystal balls. If they are, the weather ceiling is 0-0. So, anyway, thank you very much.
Thanks, Bill.
Okay.
Good to talk to you.
All right. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye-bye.